Hello lads, ladies, gents, ladetts, whoever, whatever, welcome back to another video. I don't shy away from the fact that I am typically a gameplay first, story second type of guy, but today's game, Thomas Was Alone by small indie dev Mike Bithell, is something that made me question that. Originally releasing back in early 2013, this puzzle platformer got rid of all the fancy graphics and over-the-top animations you would expect, keeping everything relatively simple and minimalistic. You think this could lead to a somewhat boring experience, but it is far from it. Although the game's characters are represented by simple geometric shapes and a relatively basic color scheme, they all seemingly have their own personalities, well represented by how they work mechanically, along with wonderful narration provided by Danny Wallace, which went on to win him a BAFTA award.
Laura was pleased this one was behind a wall. Maybe he'd never know what she could do. Maybe they could just have a conversation.
This game would receive critical acclaim, and amongst the majority of players, it is well loved. However, it is worth noting that some people gave this game a rather low score. But from what I can tell, the whole point of this game went straight over their head, so I'm not sure it would be fair to say this game deserves any real major hate to the point of giving it a 1 out of 10. Sure, I can understand a 5, a 6, a 7, hell, even a 4, but to be able to sit there and say, oh, this game deserves a 1, a 0? I think you're crazy.
It's only a game. Why you have to be mad?
Is it a perfect experience? No. It has its own issues, and we will get into that, but considering one of the complaints basically boiled down to I had to solve puzzles in the game using the game's mechanics and I didn't enjoy that, I think it's fair to say we're going to ignore most of these negative comments. The general plot of Thomas Was Alone follows a bunch of AIs that have become self-aware and are attempting to free other AIs and let them become a part of the real world. As you can probably take away from this, symbolism is going to play a massive role at this game's core, to the point that every character, action, and level itself represents something. It's not so convoluted that you won't understand what's going on. However, there is enough complexity here to make it interesting so you don't lose interest. And it's all done in a way that feels really natural and makes sense and flows with the story. A good example of all of this though is the orange bloke of Chris. He's short, can't jump very high, and the narration gives us insight into his personality, with him being somewhat grumpy at the world for his situation, wanting to mainly be left alone because of his own shortcomings. Eventually he finds Laura, whom, by his own admission, he falls in love with. And since Laura has the ability to boost jumps of anyone who lands on top of her, it really helped complete Chris. It helps him overcome his biggest weakness. The character of Claire was ready to die. She was introduced as such. However, upon finding out she can float in water, which no one else can do, she resolves herself to help everyone she can. Wanting to be a superhero, to be someone that can be relied upon, to be useful, to be needed, to be loved. This is only the tip of the iceberg when it comes to discussing these characters, and I'm not ashamed to admit that I grew really connected to them all. With their battles and struggles throughout the game, I was finding myself getting emotional over a fucking square. We all go through struggles, and with this expansive character roster consisting of Thomas, Chris, John, Laura, Claire, James, and Sarah on their quest to become architects for the second generation, I'm sure you'll find someone that you can relate to amongst all of them. Visually, the game is pretty much the textbook definition of minimalism, consisting of high contrast characters, with the exception of the second generation of AIs, more on those in a little bit. You will notice the ground that you jump on is always black blocks, while the background is typically a solid color. They will have some minor animations and things of that nature for the player's benefit, so they're not too boring to look at, but pretty much your focus is going to be on the character you're playing, which is something that I think is a wonderful choice because it really drives home this character focus that the game has. It's using its art style to drive home a narrative point, and I've talked about this in the previous videos where games will use mechanics to drive home a narrative point, but this is probably one of the first times I've seen a game do it visually, with it arguably being the best I've ever seen try to do this. The game's sound effects also take a pretty minimalist approach as well, being simple bleeps and bloops, whereas the game's music has some wonderful complexity to it, while with the help of the game's narration, it invokes emotions in a way that reflects what's going on when it comes to the challenges that the characters will face, making this one of the most cohesive experiences I've ever had, with not only the visuals and audio working well together in order to drive home the characters and their characterization, but the game's core mechanics as well. Just look at the second generation of AIs. They're grey blocks. They actually have no inherent abilities by default. However, by passing through colored areas within the level, they actually gain those abilities, meaning they learn from the previous generation. Unlike the previous generation, however, they actually can change their abilities, making them not so limited when it comes to their gameplay possibilities, making everything meld together pretty much perfectly. As mentioned, this game is a puzzle platformer. So how is the platforming and how are the puzzles? Well, this is where things can get a little more subjective and it comes down to your own personal taste as the player. Personally, I enjoy a good puzzle game, and something that can make me think a little bit about what the answer is going to be as I learn the game's logic is something I always really enjoy. However, I will say the puzzles, although not completely brain dead by the later stages is where the game can fall a little bit flat, as they aren't very difficult at all. They will stump you a little bit in certain parts, but once you're aware of how the game wants you to play and how its physics work, you're going to fly through this game. The platforming itself is pretty responsive, though I think it is worth noting I did get the occasional little bit of input lag, so just be wary, it might happen to you. In saying that, it could be down to my setup, so I'm not going to blame the game outright. Everything you would expect in a platformer is here, from spikes to moving platforms and other hazards in general. You'll find yourself navigating through levels with relative ease, with this game thankfully not being one of those rage-baiting or overly difficult platformers like a Super Meat Boy. Thomas Was Alone won't leave you feeling overly frustrated at any point and wanting to put the game down. However, it is not a flawless experience. The game does have some wonky hit detection, and in my 2 different playthroughs on 2 different platforms, I did unfortunately encounter. It didn't ruin the overall experience, but that with the occasional input lag can definitely drive you a little bit crazy from time to time, but it's not going to make this game impossible to play. If anything, the hardest part of this game was swapping characters, and that is 100% a skill issue on my part for sure, but I did find myself getting annoyed swapping characters from time to time, as I would want to get to one character that might be several clicks away, but I might only hit the button once or one too many times. Sometimes I'd even go in the wrong direction because my brain just wouldn't click with it, causing me to move a character I didn't want to. This usually doesn't cause any major problems, but when you got everyone lined up in their boxes and you just need to move one character, it can be a little bit frustrating. If the game had a more traditional wheel select option, I think that would have helped a lot. It does have a way to do it similar to a wheel select, but the way it's formatted, I just did not enjoy it, so I never used that mechanic. Consisting of 10 main levels with 10 sub-levels to each of them, there isn't a lack of content here for you to enjoy. However, overall, Thomas Was Alone is not an overly long game, as you could probably beat it in a few hours. This could be due to the fact that it was Mike Bithell's first major release. Being an Indiegogo project, it is one of the few community-backed games from that time period to actually come out. They're actually still played by Kickstarter, GoFundMe, and Indiegogo scams and failures to this day. If I was to level another criticism at the game though, I would say due to its focus on narrative over pretty much everything else, it means the game doesn't have a ton of replayability, meaning if you've played it once, you might not want to play it again, or at least not for a while. And that is understandable. I'm not a firm believer that every game needs to be played through a million times in order for me to get my money's worth, but a little bit more replayability definitely would have helped. As a neat touch though, if you do want a little bit of replayability, you can play with developer commentary. And if you get a chance to do a playthrough with this commentary, I highly recommend it, because you'll get insight into the characters, the symbolism, the puzzles, and the general level design itself. Overall, it made the experience even better for me because there was stuff that I just didn't quite pick up on initially. If I had to sum up Thomas Was Alone very quickly, I would say the game is a breath of fresh air. It's new, it's different. Even over a decade after its release, it still has a story to tell. There are characters you will relate to, a world you will explore, and things that you will question. Could it have more difficult puzzles? Yes. Could it have more difficult platforming sections? Certainly. It could have more gameplay. It could have more focused ideas. But if it did, it wouldn't be Thomas Was Alone. It would lose its identity and just be a run-of-the-mill platformer in the never-ending sea that is the run-of-the-mill platformer. And given this game's thematic ideas about identity, finding yourself, and your place, to me, even its existence is a symbol of what Thomas Was Alone is about. So with that, lads, ladies, gents, ladetts, whoever, whatever, it brings us to the end of another video. I hope you enjoyed this look back at Thomas Was Alone, the lovely little platformer that is. If you enjoyed this video, please consider hitting that like button. If you want to go that extra step, you can hit the subscribe button. If you want to go that extra mile, you can support me on Ko-fi from just $1 a month like these lovely people here. And with that, I'll see you guys in the next one. Stay safe out there. Bye.